Hello, eager learners. Welcome to replicate this AE edition. This is problem number 5. I like to call it blind date, for which reasons you will see. Here's an example of what we're about to make. Blind date, seal your fate. It looks like the title of a bad rom-com, so let's dive right in. Here is my pre-baked version. Let's start by making a new blank comp. This is one of the replicate this problems that doesn't have any source files. We're going to generate it all from within After Effects. So let's call it 5 blind date. It's not 636. We're going to make it 1280 by 720. At least I am, because my screen is small. I'm going to bump it up to 30 frames. And 16 seconds should be enough. Background color, I want to be my favorite color, which is strawberry, somewhere in between about red and magenta, about right there. That looks great. Okay, new blank file. A blank canvas upon which we may create rom-com-esque artwork. Well, let's start out by getting our type. We're going to have 3 type layers here, and we're also going to use track mats, if you remember what track mats are. Perhaps you've never heard of a track mat. Well, we're going to learn right now, today. I'm going to delete this, close that rather, and let's go to Command T or up to our type tool and write the word blind. And I'm going to do it in all caps. Blind. I'm going to hit Enter. Now I happen to know that I want about an 80 pixel tall word here, and I know that I want a less traditionally handsome typeface for this. If you've ever been on a bad blind date, that's kind of what this rom-com is going to be about, so I'm going to choose something that's has a little bit more personality than I usually like to use. How about some medieval typeface like this. That looks great. I don't know if that's big enough. 80 pixels is kind of small. Let's go with 150, 147. That looks better. Let's write the word date. Caps lock is on. Now, we do not want this medieval typeface for the word date. We want to use a ubiquitous Futura Bold-esque font, and one that I think all Mac users have on their computer is Avenir Next. If you are not on a Macintosh, you will have to choose a Futura, or maybe even, heaven forbid, an Arial Black, if that's what you have. I won't judge you. I just want you to get as close as possible. Let's choose Avenir Next, the heaviest weight they have, which is heavy. Look at that. Does that not look like a rom-com, a bad, slightly humorous comedy? What do you think, 150? Yeah, let's go to 150 on our Blackmore medieval. Let's get a little bit more spacing between our words, and let's optically balance them. Grab them both by shift clicking, and let's center them. I always like to check what the exact center of the screen is by hitting the quote key, and we're pretty close there. Pretty close. So I'm going to click down. I'm just using my down arrows here, my directional arrow keys, and that is going to be good enough for this tutorial. Blind Date. The subtitle of this movie is Seal Your Fate, so I'm going to Command T to get back to my type tool. And I'm going to write the words seal your fate with the caps lock key on. Grab my black arrow. This needs to be a lot smaller. I'm going to go for 80, and I'm going to go back to Avenir Next. Regular. How about that? With a little bit of tracking. There we go. What do you think? Is that sufficiently rom-com-ish, rom-comedic? Let's take a look at the centering. By the way, if you have one object selected, you can align it to the width of the composition. You can just select your layer and go down to the Align panel and see where it says Align Layers to Composition or the Selection. Right now we're going to center this in the center of the composition. It looks like we're already there, but that is where you do that, in the Align panel. Okay, we've got our type set. Let's check our example. Yeah, that's pretty good. Pretty good. All right, let's get rid of the title safe lines. Okay, now I mentioned that we were going to use something called track match, which is a way of masking out your type. And we're going to need 3 track mats for this. We're going to need one for blind, one for date, and one for seal your fate. A mask can be anything. It can be an imported file from Illustrator or Photoshop. But we're going to use shape layers in After Effects. Now, shape layers are a vector shape that you can create if no layers are selected and you go up here to one of these drawing tools or the pen tool. Come on, go away, go away. There's our pen tool and there's our rectangle tool. We're going to use the rectangle tool. Notice how no layers are selected in my timeline, and I'm going to draw a rectangle directly over the top of blind. I'm going to deselect that. Actually, I'm going to call this shape layer blind matte. Blind matte. And I'm going to deselect and I'm going to draw a rectangle. It just has to be barely bigger than the word itself. I'm going to call this one date. Now the way that I am renaming these layers is by hitting the return key, and I'm going to type date matte. Let's close those down for now. We actually don't need to delve into those. Now we need one for seal your fate. Go back here and draw one that's just a little bit bigger than our type. I'm going to call this seal fate matte. Okay, we now have 3 boxes. If you're familiar with the concept of a track mat, you know that a track mat has to consist of 2 layers. And the mask goes on top. So seal your fate. I'm actually going to move this down to the bottom because it is visually on the bottom in my comp window. I'm going to move the word blind up top, blind's mask, oops, to the top of that. And okay, so everything is the way we need it. The type is underneath the mask. Let's start with the word blind. Now, if you can't see the track mat column in your timeline, go ahead and click the words. Oh my goodness. Am I not recording right now? I am. That's good. Okay. Sorry about that. I am going to select the word blind in my timeline, and I'm going to click the toggle switches and modes button so that I can see the track mat column. See where it says Turk mat? That is where I need to be. Now on the bottom layer, a track mat is set from the bottom layer. The bottom layer needs to tell the layer on top of it to use it as a mask. So I'm going to click the blind layer, go over to the track mat column, and in the drop down say alpha mat, blind mat. Use the blind mat layer as what's called an alpha mat. It's going to use the transparency of that shape layer to reveal the word blind. Now that doesn't look like much, right? But if I drag around the word blind, if I select the word blind here and I drag it around, you can see that it is actually being masked out, and I can move it and do whatever I want with it and it'll always be masked. I can also move the mask itself, so you get an idea of the power of this versus just masking a layer, which is not as movable. All right, let's do the same thing with date. Let's select the word date, which is the bottom layer underneath the mat. Let's go to the track mat column and let's say alpha mat. Use date mat to mask me out. Let's do the same thing with seal your fate. Let's go to alpha mat, seal fate mat, and now all of our text has been revealed again. All we have to do now is animate our text in. Now in our example, the word blind flies in from the left and settles into place. So let's go up to the word blind, and we're at 0 seconds on our timeline, and then we're going to set a position keyframe. Option P will give us a position keyframe, and we want it to fly in over the course of, I don't know, a half second. So let's zoom in on our timeline by hitting plus so we can see full seconds, and let's jump 10 seconds by hitting Command Shift right arrow, that's 10 frames, and then command right arrow is just single frames. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 will give us 15 frames, which is half of 1 second in a 30 frame per second composition. By the way, you can see all this happening over here, these blue numbers at the top left of my timeline. Okay, I'm going to put another keyframe here because I know this is the spot where I want it to end up. I'm going to go back to my original keyframe. I'm going to use these keys because everybody should start using these keys more often. I'm going to jump back to the beginning and I'm going to grab my blind text layer and I'm going to move it out to the side here until it's invisible. Now, when we play forward, it comes in seemingly out of nowhere. Okay, let's get all basic animation first and then we'll work on easing and motion blur. Let's do the same thing with date. Let's see, I can't remember what movement date makes. Let's go back to our example here. Oh, date writes on. That's right. Date comes on first, writes on one letter at a time, and then blind slips in. Okay, so the word date, I know we're gonna need to go back to 0. We're gonna flip down our text twirly. And if you remember from class, the way to animate letters on one at a time using the X-Files effect or the write-on effect is to animate its opacity. So once I flip down the text layer, I can reveal the animate dropdown. The animate dropdown contains opacity, and I can then change the opacity. This is text opacity, remember, it's not the same as the opacity in here. Don't even open that, we don't need it. I'm going to click 0 in opacity. And if you remember what range selectors do for us, you remember that it is the start property that allows us to write on our words. Because the start is the left side of our magnifying glass and end is the right side of our magnifying glass. By scrubbing these values in blue right here, we can preview what's about to happen and then we will know which properties to keyframe. Let's keyframe start. And let's again go to about 15 frames. Command left arrow, there we are, 15 frames. Scrub up to 100% and then preview that. There we go. We also need to turn off the smoothness, which under range selector is under the advanced option, smoothness 0%. Let's close that back up for screen real estate's sake. I'm going to give myself a little bit more room in my timeline. Okay, so smoothness is off. I know that blind needs to come on after date, so what I'm going to do is close this down. I'm going to collapse everything but the keyframed property on my date text layer by hitting the letter U. And I'm going to grab blind and blind's matte. Let's see. Let's go to the second keyframe on my date layer. And I'm going to drag both of these layers to start right where my second keyframe ends. And then I'm going to drag my continuous time indicator to about right here and hit the letter N to set the work area, and then let's preview this thing. Okay, blind takes a little bit long. Remember, this is a rom-com. We want things to look funny and active. So let's go to blind and let's make that happen not quite so slowly by dragging the keyframes together. Okay, we might as well start applying easing and motion blur at this point. Motion blur is a universal setting that will affect any layers that we animate in the future. So let's go ahead and click the global motion blur switch. And since we can't see the motion blur switch on our layers, we're going to click toggle switches and modes. And we actually only need to select it on the text layer. The mask isn't moving, the matte layers are not moving, only the text layers are. So I'm going to click it there, click it there. It won't matter if we have it on all the layers, but I'm just trying to be efficient here. Let's select all of our position keyframes. Let's see, we're not going to need it on the range selector, actually, only on the word blind. So let's select our position keyframes and let's go up to Animation, Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease, or F9, and let's preview. Ah, much better. Much better. Easy Ease and Motion Blur will improve even the homeliest blind date. Okay, so it's looking good so far. Looking good. Last thing to do is seal your fate. Now if we look at our example, the words seal your fate come on one at a time. One, seal your fate. But we've just created one text layer. How is that going to work? You might be asking yourself. Well, it just so happens that the principles we use to write the word date work for letters and or words. Let's flip down seal your fate's text twirly. Let's animate not opacity this time, but position. You might have noticed that they start below the track mat and they move up into place. So we need to move our Y position. The second field is always the vertical movement, or the Y. Look what happens when I drag this all the way to the right. It's moving the Y position of my text out of visibility because of that track mat. And if you remember from class, what range selectors do is they apply an effect, and as you peel that effect away, After Effects tweens between the effect and the non-affected text. That is how these things work. So I'll give you a hint. If we peel away that low text and reveal the high text, it's going to do something like that. That's almost exactly what we want, isn't it? Let's see. Let's go to the end of blind is the second thing that comes up, so we're going to go to the last blind keyframe, and that is actually where we want to start our seal your fate. Actually, the layers don't even need to appear before that, so let's move them to the current time indicator's position, the left side, or the end point of both of these layers to where the current time indicator is by hitting the left square bracket. And let's lay down a start keyframe, and the reason I know that is because I have previewed it, I have trialed and errored it by scrubbing these values, so I'm going to keyframe that. And let's say this should happen over the course of 1 full second. So Command Shift right directional arrow key 1, 2, 3 times, scrub up to 100%. Now, it's supposed to come up as whole words, not individual letters. So how are we going to do that? How do we tell After Effects to use words, not characters? Let's flip down our advanced twirly, and instead of based on characters, let's try based on words and see what that does for us. Based on words gives us whole words popping up. Again, that's under the advanced twirly, based on words, not characters. Up to this point in your life, you've only used based on characters. Today we're using based on words. Let's close that. Boom, boom, boom. Let's go to 3 seconds, set our work area, and preview how this looks. Okay, the only thing I don't like at this point is that there's no motion blur on Seal Your Fate, as well as the movement. The movement is very linear and robotic. So one thing we can do to start, here, let's stop that from animating. Let's make sure Seal Your Fate has the layer-based motion blur. Should we easy ease the range selector? That'll help a little bit. Let's go up to animation, easy ease, or F9. And another thing we can do is, let's try ease low. Remember, ease low, ease high is easing at the beginning, ease low is easing at the end. Let's try turning that up and see what that does for us. That's a lot better, isn't it? I like that. We could experiment with the graph shape under shape. Right now we're using square, but it seems like ease low is helping us a lot. I like that. Okay, I think we're pretty much done, guys. The only thing we need is a highly romantic musical selection to go with this, I think. So let's get a excellently performed version of maybe Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. That's what I think of when I think of romance. Let's drag in this song Spanish Flea. And I'm going to hit LL on my audio layer here so I can see where the waveforms are. And let's just see what this sounds like. That's pretty good, but that's not the part of the song that I really, really like. The part that I like is right here. Yes, that's brilliant. We need to extend this by a few seconds. Let's double its length. Let's go to 6 seconds. And let's extend our work area by hitting the letter N. And let's even fade in and fade out our audio. How about that? Actually, it doesn't look like we need to fade it in because it starts at a good place. Starts great, so let's just fade it out. If I wanted to put my current time indicator at the very end of my work area, I happen to know, oh, you know what, I'm not on an extended keyboard. Never mind. If you are on a laptop keyboard, Option Command left arrow takes you to the home, and Option Command right arrow takes you to the end of your timeline. But I need to go to the end of my work area and set an audio levels keyframe. And then I'm going to go back about a full second, set another keyframe. So I've got 2 keyframes. I'm going to hit the plus key to zoom in a little bit. From 5 seconds to 6 seconds, I want the audio to fade out. Now remember, in After Effects audio, the normal level is 0, and silence is a high negative number or a low negative number, however you want to look at it. So the second keyframe, I'm going to drag all the way down to negative 48 decibels, hit LL so I can see my audio fading out. And let's preview. Pretty good, pretty good. I think we're about done, guys. Thanks for listening and enjoy your blind date.